Welcome, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast, to our first episode of the year. Oh, glorious it is. I'm Julian in Bristol.
I'm Chris in London.
And I'm Ben in Newcastle.
Now, we're having a bit of a special episode this time, listeners, because we're joined by the new managing director of the Bylines Network, Ben Dickenson, who will be taking over duties next week at time of recording, I think. Ben, welcome to the Bylines Network.
As of today, in fact.
As of today. Oh, okay. I'm really going to have to keep the swear words down to a minimum. So we thought me and Chris will ask you just a couple of questions, just so the audience can get to know you better and what you plan to do with your time here at the Bylines Network. So I guess the first question really is, what drew you to the Bylines Network?
It's a magnet, isn't it? I think, for all the good things. That's probably the simplest bite-sized answer I can give you. My career has been at a generous description eclectic, an even more generous description diverse and full and rich. I've been really lucky to have some really good jobs, and I've always been motivated by where I can find a place that I'm comfortable with people who share a similar philosophy, who are progressive, who believe in a world that respects humanity, who support democracy, and want to make a difference in real people's lives, and particularly where the voices of those who don't get heard are unable to be heard. Whatever sector that's in, that's kind of been my mentality, whatever job I've done. And I can't really think of a better place to be doing that in the time we're in than in a network of locally based, regionally run citizen journalism publications. And I think, accepted the job. End of November. There's a bit of time handover last year. I think in the time between the end of November 24 and here we are, early January, mid-January 25, it feels even more like a very relevant and important place to be, where we might tell the truth about some stuff. Incredibly well-written, fact-checked articles, but that reflect the opinions and the stories that matter to real people in our communities. Who wouldn't want to?
The Bylines Network has gone woke. I can't believe it.
Oh no! Do I have to reset the balance now with something very unwoke? I couldn't possibly.
Just say Jodie Whittaker is responsible for an uptick in crime amongst young guys because she got cast as the Doctor. It seemed to work for the last lot.
So Ben, one of the questions I had for you is: so what did you do before coming to Bylines? What's your background? So you mentioned it was quite eclectic, I think was the word you used.
Yeah, where do you start? I've got 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. Never finished the PhD because a small package of humanity in the form of my son came along, and I thought he might be more of a priority. But the degrees are arts degrees, so I trained at drama college, studied film at master's level, and then project managed in the arts sector and did freelance work for quite a while, and then moved into the voluntary and community sector, worked in housing and homelessness. Worked in the children and young people's voluntary sector quite extensively, spent a little bit of time at a local authority leading children and young people's policy, but kept going back to places where stories could be told. So I've been an associate developing writers at Alphabet Theatre, which was last year, the Fringe Theatre of the Year, according to the Stage newspaper, if you trust their journalism. We obviously do at Alphabet Theatre, trust their journalism because they gave an award. And my most recent day job was at Theatre Hullabaloo, which is one of the UK's leading children's arts organisations, one of the few dedicated theatres for children and families work, which is crazy. There's only 4 of them in the country. It's the only one north of London. And we were developing programmes of working communities to use play and creativity to enhance and change people's lives, and trying to use the stories we found from that, the stories of change through that experience, to influence national policy in the early years sector and education and government. So it does sound quite different in a way from the managing director job at Bylines, but I think there are so many bits of continuity if you think of it as being about people ultimately, and what makes a difference to people.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like you and I have quite similar backgrounds, because I also got trained to be a filmmaker, and it's going so well for me. What do you hope to achieve while you're here? Do you have any aims that you wish to fulfill?
Well, there are priorities and there are long-term aims. I think the immediate priorities are about ensuring that this fantastic thing we've got with, a few thousand people that write for it, several hundred volunteers that make it run, 10 editors-in-chief, a support team at the center of the whole operation supporting the 10 publications and this podcast, that all of those things are sustainable and resilient. That isn't as straightforward as it might sound to those who don't have an informed knowledge. If you do know much about regional journalism, you'll know that it's in financial crisis in the commercial part of regional journalism and existential crisis. And also, it's probably in a crisis for its soul as well. It's so driven by monopoly interests, even at that local level, and definitely at a national level. So sustaining what we've got and finding the right resources so that people are able to do that as volunteers or as paid staff really well is really important. And then I think it's about how do we grow the reach of that model, both in terms of the people that read the publications, which isn't an insignificant number of people anyway, regularly in the court of millions, hundreds of thousands. But, there are those articles that get out to millions of people as well. And it's interesting looking at the data today. I have to say, so complete aside, but looking at data today, just being able to suddenly look at the back office and sites of, you find, articles that are really popular in the Netherlands from East Anglia. Brilliant, where reach is everywhere. So, there's more nuance to it when you dig into the whole picture than you might realize. For me, there's an inclusion agenda of those voices that wouldn't otherwise get heard. And through that inclusion agenda, there's a real opportunity. We bring more of those voices in. We support them to write those well-written, credible, fact-checked, holding truth to power, progressive and internationalist focused articles. I think there's a real opportunity to invigorate democracy locally in a way that perhaps hasn't happened before, and to fill the space that's been left by the death of regional journalism on a commercial basis with something way better. So I've got 100 ideas, which would probably take 100 podcasts to talk through, but some of those might take a little while. We've got to strengthen what we've got first, which is incredibly strong, but driven on the will of people. And I want to make sure that will is properly structured, supported, and resourced so that we can then springboard to the next bit.
I mean, at the risk of stepping on Jules' toes, because I think this was a question he potentially had, but it kind of leads quite neatly on from what you said. I mean, in the climate that we live in at the moment, you can only look at the sort of downfall of Twitter or X and the amount of sort of rubbish and misinformation that's out there at the moment, especially with, UK politicians being as they are. In your mind, what role can the Bylines Network take in 2025 to combat that kind of behavior, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of misinformation that they're not doing already? What can be added, or what could be done differently?
Well, I mean, it's kind of trite to say we are doing a lot of that already, because that army, and it is an army, small army of citizen journalists fact checking what's out there on those other social media sources, which we're present on as well. We have a presence and voice in those. So I think we can use our presence and our reach to reflect accurately what's happening in the world and to challenge some of that misinformation. And I think over time, over the course of the year, and probably in years to come, we can start to foreground a much more nuanced, much more realistic and organic picture of what is happening in people's lives and how they understand and see those big pictures in the world. So, do I even want to get into Musk? I don't know, really. Do you want to get into Musk? I think, this might lead to swearing if we're not careful.
I mean, go ahead.
It struck me in the assault on British politics and British politicians around the child sexual exploitation question, and it struck me in that how quickly someone with that platform can generate a message that actually reaches democratically elected representatives who had a platform, whether you agree with it or disagree, had a platform, had a mandate, had a manifesto, have a track record in Keir Starmer's case, whatever your opinions on Keir Starmer, of being at the centre of dealing with some of these issues in a legal sense when he was at the CPS previous guys. How quickly all of that could just disappear from the public gaze, and what we were focused on was something that was said in a few characters by a billionaire who owns a platform and has got a really big voice. So I think that part of the role that Bylines Network has got is it can start to amplify the voices of ordinary people who have real lived experience of that. I'm not talking about necessarily putting victims of sexual exploitation and demanding that they write articles, but people who worked with the police, people who lived in those communities where some of those things happen, social workers, child protection social workers, lawyers. There are a whole set of people out there who are already part of the Bylines Network as journalists who have a really informed, nuanced perspective on this. And indeed, there are some articles already, and very quickly on the Bylines publications, responding to some of those things that were being said and were catching a fire elsewhere on social media, kicked off by that particular, now disowned by every country in the world, we hope, billionaire. And I think that's one of the things that we're uniquely placed to do, because it is built by people from the bottom up. That's one of the reasons of coming to work for the Bylines Network. It's not a top-down organization. It really is. My first day today has been a series of democratic meetings with everybody putting ideas in and talking about the next thing we could do and how do we stimulate more people to be involved. And nobody's coming at it with an ego. It's the exact antithesis of Musk. There's nobody sitting there. In fact, everybody's kind of go, oh, no, it's not my work. It's her work, or it's his work, or it's their work, or, I didn't really do this. You go, hang on a minute, look at what you've built in the last 4.5, 5 years. I think that there is a real potential to be the bulwark of nuanced, genuinely reflective, organic, local, real opinion and fact of people. And because we're impress regulated, because we fact check our articles, because we mediate away from the potential of defaming somebody of defamation or libel very, very strongly, because we have that editorial rigor, what we write will also be truthful. People can rely on what we say, whoever it comes from, and know that that person is one of us, not a disassociated billionaire who tries to present as one of us or one of them across the pond, perhaps now, and actually represents an entirely different way of living and thinking to the vast majority of people. Nor Andrew Tate, for that matter, or the Bruv Party, as we've now discovered in the last week.
Oh, I missed that.
Oh, that was genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever read all week. Just like, thankfully he's not going to be PM, because we actually have rules against people who've been in prison becoming MPs, let alone foreign prisons. It's interesting you talk about we already have a very strong readership and a very strong listener base, because we do. I see all the numbers that are coming in. It's one of the few avenues of dopamine that I get every week. Do you think there is an argument? Because when all the people and all the institutions left Twitter to go onto Blue Sky, there was talks for weeks and weeks about how dangerous echo chambers are. Do you think, or at least are you hoping to extend our reach to encapsulate some of those people, or do you think that our reach can only go so far?
I think it's a good question. I think one of the things that I want to do quickly is, I suppose, part of the answer is start to get to grips with an understanding of the detail of who that readership is, because I think we understand it to a certain extent, but lots of, including big corporate news organizations, we're not asking people who visit every one of our websites to give us all their data all the time. So finding out exactly who reads what we do out of those numbers is not always straightforward. So I think part of looking at who the demographic is, the logic is still true, isn't it? That a relatively small but very well-informed group of people can have a much, much, much bigger influence. They can change a country or the world if they're really motivated enough. So it might be that we ought to reach far enough, but I think we can reach further. I think what it's about is finding a way to engage with the different sectors of our society, and starting with the country we publish in, or the countries, plural, England, and but obviously you've got the Welsh publication and the Scottish publication. Oh, by the way, I'm going to do a plug for you. If you haven't listened to the Welsh language podcast, that was one of my favorites. I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favorites. I did think you should be trying to do a Geordie language podcast, but I thought that might cause more contention than engagement.
Look, Ben, I'm not going to give into that stereotype that just because we can't understand a word tuners say, that doesn't mean that there is a tuner language.
No, I know. Hey, listen, I live very near the centre of Newcastle, and on certain nights of the week, particularly after Newcastle United have won a match, there are all sorts of different languages spoken that many people may not understand unless they've been in the town for quite a while. I think there's a real potential to reach wider audiences that we engage with. And if you're asking if that's one of my personal ambitions, absolutely. I think it has to be built on, again, a nuanced understanding of what that means. It might be that there are gaps in our current audience and readership, that mirror some of the other gaps, but they can't be as big as the gaps in mainstream media. It can't be that only 11% of the people that write from us are from non-white British communities. It can't be that 44% of the people that write from us went to private schools and 44% of our editors were Oxbridge educated, as it is in the mainstream media. And if we can keep pushing those numbers up, the percentages up of diversity and inclusion, then we will, as a domino effect, engage with much wider pools of people within those communities and sectors of society anyway. And we do. Occasionally we break a story, right? At Bylines, one of the network's journalists finds something that is a bit of a scoop, and we can, in the same way as, a sister organization at Bylines Times does, we can find something that breaks through and reaches a much wider audience. The biggest reach for a Bylines story via a social media post is in the millions, 6 million people. So, it is potential with a relatively small readership around some things to go much further. The other side of it is, I think, is understanding what does reach people. I want to dig into that even more, because it's not necessarily people responding to, big story last year, the assisted dying legislation and those debates. Some of it is people talking about what's happening in Portsmouth this weekend, and what they've seen in their local council meeting, which is about roads. And people all over the country want to read it because it somehow relates to them and their own experience, which tells us that actually the quickest way to engage with audiences is to talk about things that really matter to real people, whatever those things might be. And again, that's the beauty of a democratically run bottom-up organization like the Bylines Network and its publications.
On this, while on the subject of sort of engagement and that kind of vibe, the way that organizations like this continue is through engagement, and you want to nurture that future generation of young people to be writing articles, to be producing podcasts and documentary videos, things like that. So what kind of ideas and plans have you got to basically build up the engagement of young people moving forward?
Interesting. Long discussion with one colleague today about exactly that topic, actually, which is really fascinating and really exciting. And they are just ideas at the moment. And again, in an organization that a set of publications that have their own editors-in-chief and their own teams, I wouldn't want to predetermine for them what is best for the west of England as opposed to the northeast of England or Scotland or Wales or so on. I think that we have some tools already in the toolkit for that. We have our student placements, which have been really successful, and some of the people who've done student placements have gone on to amazing things, really serious careers. And that's a remarkable thing. And we probably can get a bit better as one first step at telling some of those stories about the younger people that have written for us or been placed with us already that have gone to do other things. But I do think there's a future in which we can be looking at what in another context might be called community development or project work, reaching into, I hate the term outreach, but I use it all the time. It just feels wrong. Just like I hate the term hard to reach. Like, nobody's hard to reach. They're there. It's us that has if we aren't reaching them, that's down to us. But I do think there are communities that we could spend some serious time working with to build up deep roots and relationships. And that isn't the case of an old white guy like me with lots of hats and a beard going into a community of people that I don't represent. It's finding people who are advocates for the kind of thing we want to do in that community and building them up to bring their peers on board. We might need to raise some more money to do that in a different way. And we might need people's individual support to do that for those that want to do that. But we might be turning to some funding bodies who haven't funded us before and saying, look, there are unheard voices in parts of the West Midland, in parts of Glasgow, and in parts of Manchester, on the South Coast, and those voices can be heard talking about the things they want to talk about in a really credible way that also potentially sets them up with new skills for a better future. If you help us to really spend some time engaging them, the fruits of that might take time, but they'll be better for not rushing and being tokenistic about we've just got another 17-year-old to write for us. The other part of it's I walked the other day past an organization called Headliners, which is a charity that supported young journalists. And I don't know if it's fully shut, but its doors were shut on the day I walked past. But there are organizations around that have quite a strong track record of working with young people, not outside the university sector, around storytelling with a bit of journalistic rigor. I think we might well find that once we put the klaxon out there and sound it, we might have a queue of people who want to be part of a movement of getting young people to really tell their voices, because where else are they going to do it at the moment, really, in a really genuine and authentic way? Where's that going to happen? Certainly not going to happen in the Daily Mail or the Mirror. It's unlikely to happen in the Guardian. If we're honest, is it going to happen on the BBC? Channel 4, where's it is it going to happen on Radio 1? We've kind of got a duty to do that, I think, over time, as well as a real opportunity there. And it's good for us, isn't it? Because it will sow the seeds of the next generation of editors-in-chief. Writer today at 16, 17, editor-in-chief in 3, 4, 5 years' time when you hit your early 20s. Why not?
You speak about like reach and growth and all that. Are there any plans right now, at least in like the distant future or like the near future, of including Hampshire or Northern Ireland? Or is it very much a case of like consolidating the areas that are being left behind that you have now before you move on to those ones?
We're not quite fully national, though. I tell you on board, and I know there's lots of debate around that. I think I don't know yet that it's my place to answer that question directly. I think we have a group of editors-in-chief who I meet for the first time as a group on Thursday, so in a couple of days' time, and our existing directors. So I think there's some work to be done to explore what the possibilities are, why we aren't there already. There are challenges in some of those places. If you're asking me personally, would I like total world domination of the Bylines networks, including, you mentioned Africa? Was Africa next? And maybe Africa before London. Can we do Africa and then hop back? I mean, one's warmer than the other most of the time, so I would like to do that. But I think we have to look at why we're not there yet and see what the collective that really makes the decisions about Bylines think is the next best step. I suppose the other part of it, which is I think really apparent in the story of the development of the Bylines Network, is how quickly things have moved from there being an initial publication in Yorkshire to then others springing up in other areas, and that being about people power, people wanting to do it. So people in those other places have got to want to do it. But also how important it was that wasn't a London-centric development, given the retrenchment of mainstream media into London or Manchester, I suppose, in BBC's case, or Media City. But the retrenchment to those big urban areas away from the rest of the country has been one of the problems that I think Bylines is there to address, to talk about the places where people live that are otherwise neglected. So that's not saying London's ruled out. I was born there, so obviously at some point I'll want to be waving a bylines on a tablet around the streets of London so people can read it. But I guess we'll see what people want to do as the next step for development in the collective.
I just have this beautiful image of you outside King's Cross Station, just handing out tablets like they do with the metro.
I mean, it could be worse.
I mean, that's one way to like grow our audience. I mean,
quite expensive though.
Very expensive.
Quite expensive. But I suppose there is a serious point there about the digital divide, isn't there? And that there are significant portions of the population that still don't have access. We're not just talking about broadband connection, but access to the kit or the money to pay for the data so that they can see this stuff. So at some point, I imagine we'll also look at that question in a bit more detail. Well, how do we make sure as a series of online publications, how do we make sure that people who are experiencing that type of poverty, digital poverty, still get the same offer from us that everybody else gets, and indeed then want to write for us, because their perspective's really important to be shared with other readers, I think.
That's a really good point. And I don't think actually that's talked about enough. Not just, I mean, just more generally, I think the digital divide needs a lot more talking about. And you raise a fantastic point, those people who may well write amazing, incredible, insightful articles, but don't have the means to email or, edit on a computer. One of the final questions that I've got, it's a bit different to the ones we've asked already, a bit less job interviewing.
I do feel like it's a second or third job. If you're not happy at the end, do I have to get my coat? I'd rather not. I've only just started. It's all right. Can have a little bit longer. That'd be good.
I mean, I have got Louise on speed dial, so I could,
Yeah, okay.
But no, this is a more, well, hopefully light-hearted question. And it's what are your predictions for 2025?
Do you want serious ones, or do you want ones that really lighten the mood? I do think that what economic challenges in this country are going to continue, and I mean I don't think that's stating anything more than the obvious, is it? Particularly given some of the news today, and this sort of back and forth of it's so bad that Starmer now wants to sort of suggest that he might have been going to give Rachel Reeves a push out the door, but maybe he wasn't. This kind of or preparing the ground for whatever might be done to deal with things, and to present an excuse for what might not work now in the near future. I do wonder if that might feel a bit like a deeper financial crisis, Mark 3, 4, 5, than might be predicted, because the economy is dramatically stagnating and the policies don't feel bold enough to take the money out of the pockets of the big corporations and redistribute them elsewhere yet, if that was something that was going to happen in the future. So I do worry about the state of the economy. I don't know how to predict America. But I have about 20 of those in my head. As you've talked about on the podcast, it could completely implode and be something that falls apart very quickly, or it could be a new order in America, essentially, and a Trumpian order that continues for quite some time after that, whoever's then elected. But what I do predict is it'll be simultaneously frightening and hilarious to watch, and you won't be quite sure which one you're comfortable with each time a new news story breaks. I predict that we'll be just shocked by the randomness of a number of the things that happen, and doing double and triple takes for them with America several times over the year.
I mean, you talk that it's very hard to predict. I think it's going to be it's going to happen faster than people realize. I mean, we are talking about a group of people who went from literally on the 1st of January, we might give 100 million to Reform UK, and then on the 8th of January, just going, maybe not. I don't think he's the right guy for the job.
That's a fairly straightforward prediction to make in some ways, isn't it? They are going to fall out with each other. There's no way those personalities and those egos, even putting aside their nuanced, if you like, political differences, there are some quite big ghosts in them. You got Steve Bannon attacking Musk, haven't you, in the last few days? You kind of got it all flying around all over the place. You've got an ardent conspiracy theorist of the American media writing in the Financial Times today. It's kind of there's saying some stuff that most people would think was ridiculous, I think. So the possibility of them all falling out with each other, probably over something none of us saw coming. Who was invited to dinner at the White House and who wasn't? Who sicked up on the begonias in the White House lawn? It'll probably be something like that. Who got invited to Musk's second island or who didn't? It'll be that kind of falling out, and then it'll just spiral out. But whether that will derail the Trump project, I think is a little bit harder to predict. It could, actually, I think. But it also might embolden it depending on what the fallout is from those fallings out amongst that group.
Have you got any light-hearted predictions? I have one, but they're all mostly related to Ed Davey and his vicinity to a high diving swimming pool.
With water in it, I presume, like a functioning.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay. The man's literally the only delightful thing in politics these days. I don't want to kill him.
Where that came from, just had a thought of an empty outdoor toilet. Yeah. I am worried that at some point he's going to have an accident, though. It's kind of, like he's going to hobble into Parliament one day, with his massive neck brace on, like he's in some kind of sketch show.
Yeah, I do wonder whether he has like a close protection team who sort of say, "Are you sure that you want to do that?"
I mean, if he does come in with like a neck brace, he's probably just going to write all the policies of the Liberal Democrats for the May local elections on them. So.
If it happens, we know he listens to the podcast.
If he was getting his strategy, there you go. That's one of my predictions. Jules and Chris will set strategy for mainstream major political parties during the course of the next year. They'll just take all the light-hearted bits at the end of the podcast each month, and put it on their strategy plans. Why not? I have a little. I don't know if it's a prediction or a hope. I kind of hope that Dominic Cummings does something. I mean, he's doing a number of crazy things at the moment, but that Dominic Cummings reappears and just does some crazy sabotage for something somewhere. I kind of want him to drive somewhere for the sake of his eyesight again. All my friends that live in Barnard Castle were really pleased. I've actually got a tea towel from Barnard Castle that thanks Dominic Cummings for putting the town on the map. You said you couldn't see, but now everybody can see where we are, which is kind of great. So if Dominic Cummings could fail to do something well and therefore shine a light on a previously unheralded part of the UK, that would be awesome. Maybe the biggest prediction, to be trite about it, is how much is predictable. There are so many moving parts. That's one of the things. I mean, what was the year when all this was? It 2016, the year that loads of celebrities died, and people said it's the worst year ever. And then you went, "Oh, really?" And you look back, you go, "Was it?" And part of that was that you just didn't expect it all to happen. And I think there's kind of, we almost expect weird stuff that we aren't looking for to happen in this year. And so, as we're talking, so many of those different scenarios play out in different ways and have a knock-on effect on each other, which I guess makes this podcast and Bylines Network and Byline Times and, you know, that kind of really telling people what's happening and how these dots are connected even more important, so that people can figure out their place in them. I guess, Chris, they're not going to care unless they see, unless they can see where they fit in the map, the geopolitical map, not just the geographical map. Then they won't really have some skin in the game, will they? But they will do if they can see it more clearly or understand it more clearly. And maybe that's one of the predictions that's worth making, is that if more people are looking for an understanding, there are more of us, and we are more organized in helping to try and give a balanced, nuanced, accurate understanding. It doesn't mean we don't have opinion. It doesn't mean we don't take a side necessarily, but there are more people trying to do that coming into 2025, it feels, than they had before. And I'm biased because I've just started a job where that's the mission. but that does feel intrinsically hopeful. Out of all of this craziness and chaos and unpredictability, there are people really trying to make sense of it, so that the ordinary person in their location, whoever they are, whatever background they're from, can start to figure out their way through it and their place in it. That's a green seed of hope, I think.
Very well said.
And on that note, listeners, thank you to Ben Dickenson for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great to be here.
Until next month, listeners, I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Chris in London.
And I've been Ben in Newcastle.
Happy 2025. That was the Bylines Network podcast, hosted by me, Julian Greenbank, and Christopher Davis, and edited by me, Julian Greenbank. We thank you to our managing director once again, Ben Dickenson, for joining us, and we look forward to working with him in the future. See you in February, listeners.